And welcome back to the Educational Triage, people. This week, we have the one, the only incredible Philip Summers.
Aloha, Tony Hunt. How are you?
I'm well. And this week, we are talking about testing. What is it?
Testing. Everyone loves them. Everyone loves tests.
Do they?
No, I don't think. Some people are pretty good at them and enjoy them. I think, but it's rare. I don't think everybody looks forward to them.
Well, let's talk first about the differences between when you say test, what do you mean? When you say we're going to have an assessment, what do you mean? When we say we're going to have an evaluation, what do we mean? Okay. So testing, the purpose of a test is applying a specific process within assessment and evaluation. So it's a part of an assessment or an evaluation that involves measuring a person's knowledge, skills, or abilities in a particular area at a specific point in time. The focus of testing usually emphasizes quantifiable results such as scores, grades, or numerical measurements to determine the individual's performance. So standardized tests, quizzes, exams, and assignments can be common forms. Then we come to assessment. And the purpose of an assessment, it's broader and it's a process. And it's about gathering information about an individual's performance, skills, knowledge, or behavior to make informed decisions or provide feedback for improvement. The focus on both formative assessment, which is providing feedback during learning, and summative assessment, which is evaluating the outcomes at the end of an instructional period, may include various methods and tools to gather the information. So this can include tests, but it also encompasses other measures like observations, portfolios, self-assessments, peer assessments, and teacher assessments. So maybe your observations. An evaluation, you have a purpose, which is determining the value, worth, or quality of something, such as a program, project, or individual's performance. It involves making judgments based on the collected data. The focus would be assessing the outcomes, objectives, and goals of the subject being evaluated. It's not a Scantron. You might do a program evaluation, performance evaluation, and curriculum evaluation. And I would say that this is where we bring in rubrics. This is where we have a scale. And so everybody knows what that scale is. So it's not just somebody throwing darts at a board. It's not the old college professor who takes the papers, throws them at the stairs, and the ones that land on the top get the A, and down the stairs they get lower. Does all this make sense?
Oh yeah, it does. It all mixes in a big wash of words, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, because they're they're not the same thing, but they are. They're components of each other. Testing is a component of assessment. Evaluation can use assessment and testing.
I get it.
Okay. So, the problem being...
What's the most common... Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You start.
No, what are the most common standardized tests, I suppose, that are administered in the United States? They'd be the SATs.
The Smarter Balance, the ACT, the GRE,
let's see,
the LSAT,
those are standards.
The MCATs,
and
the CBEST.
And the CBEST. Oh, I remember those. Those are such fun. It's ACT and IB and AP at the high school level are the most common standardized tests. A standardized test meaning that it's supposed to measure everyone on the same scale for the same knowledge.
I believe, though, that the IB and the AP have evolved into where when you do your project and then you present your project. So there's an evaluation and an assessment that goes along with it. It's not necessarily based on a multiple choice test.
Well, multiple choice, tests, standardized tests usually contain a component that is a writing sample or something to synthesize and produce that way.
But for the IB, you need to, even in mathematics, you have to write a paper and defend it. You have to find an argument.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so you have a paper that you've written. You have to defend it. And it's not just the testing. There's also an interview that goes along with it. So it's a big process. So it's not just about your recitation of facts and memory, but it's a compilation of different values that come from a variety of sources. So I would say that it would fall more into the evaluative assessment kind of.
It's considered a standardized test. Whether or not we want to put it in a different category, those are considered standardized tests.
Well, there may be a standardized component to it, but it's not.
There's the most common in the United States. Those two are of the most common, AP and IB.
You're talking about the IB. SAT and the ACT, not the advanced placement and the IB.
Those are the same category. The most common standardized tests in the United States would be the SAT, the GRE, the IB, and the AP. And the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's given to all. Last time I think it was given was 2018 to all districts, all states rather. And I'm not sure what the results were. They were supposed to measure the state of the nation, but I don't think it's used for that figure as far as ranking students goes. As far as ranking states and their school systems goes either. I don't know how much of the NAEP is in there, but that's also one of those other standardized that I don't know. Well, the
NAEP is, but you're right. No, it does have it down that you can do both. The IAB and the IB as a standardized test, but I do know that there is a human component to it.
And generally speaking, that's been added, usually, and especially with a criterion directed reference, which means that, say, I want to be an auto mechanic, then the test would be definitely geared toward, auto mechanics and not so much general knowledge, but very specific knowledge.
Right.
And those are usually vocational tests. And they generally follow that same pattern of multiple choice or true false. And there's some fill in the blanks as well. But they also have a performance component to them too, usually a practicum. It might even be to perform the test or perform the deed in front of the assessor. That's generally in medicine. I know it's that way. They observe you giving CPR, doing things like that.
Right. Because there's a multiple choice part, and then there's a performance part.
Yeah, usually they just try to get your knowledge. But there's interesting things. Have you ever seen a really poorly written test?
I've seen quite a few.
2 tests. Yeah. Great stories, aren't they? I mean, like, one question will give the answer to another question, like a ton of those, or they'll just test on something that wasn't even in the curriculum. It's very strange too.
But see, I will create tests where the answer to another question is in that question.
Oh, I do it too.
And I'll do it all the way through just to see if they pick up on it.
Yeah, well, I won't give them every other answer kind of thing. It was like some of these tests I saw were written so poorly, but mostly the bad parts of them when they put in things that didn't actually get covered. So that's a horrible situation, and it happens quite a bit.
It is.
But here you are studying, and you go, "What? We didn't study that at all. I don't recall that at all."
Answer the question.
Yeah, and so you guess. You throw that dart.
So
there's one more we didn't speak of. It's called Ipsative assessment, and I didn't know that actually what it was called.
How do you spell that?
IPSATIV. Yeah,
Ipsative.
And
Tell me
I
about
like that the
Ipsonym.
best. It's you're assessing as you go through the assignment, and part of the grade wouldn't be the final product so much as the process along the way. Here's an example. I did a research paper class for seniors, and it was a whole quarter, and they were supposed to produce a research paper at the end of it. However, that wasn't as heavily graded as the process that they took, because I would meet with each student, we'd hone the paper, and they'd turn in draft after draft. I'd send them back, and so that's Ipsative. It's sort of, you don't know your grade, but you do know the process. Show your best earnest work. And the end project is generally not as weighted as the process itself, which is great. I like that because every kid's so different.
Yeah.
That, I mean, one kid's just capable of writing a brilliant paper, and one kid, if they can write a B paper, that's like an absolute triumph for them. So, yeah, a lot of their grades wound up in that effort. Considered. And I like that. It does take a lot of investment in relationships, though, which is what we've spoken about in alternative ed. You got
Well,
to
I
get
think
those and have
alternative
those.
ed lends itself to the
Yeah.
relationship. It's the mainstream that seems to throw everything to the side, because I know too many who go with, okay, if I'm going to score mathematics, I want to be able to see the work that the kid does, because I want to know if they got the wrong answer because
Right.
they screwed up somewhere along the line. And that's where the learning comes in.
Yeah. And that's one of
But
the values of testing. You can find
it
out what you've
does
done right and wrong.
well. To me, testing is no good if there's no learning in it.
Yeah. True. I like that.
If you are not learning, if the student is not learning from the test or from the results of the test, they are meaningless. They're simply another brick that you threw on my shoulder that's weighing me down. And so when people give math tests, and I know it's so much easier just to hand them a Scantron, we're paid to teach. And so if we have the process, which mathematics involves a great deal of process. And so if you screw up one tiny little area in real life, that could claim billions of dollars. I mean, think about, was it back in the 90s there was a telescope? Was there a telescope or a satellite or something that was supposed to go someplace, and it went way off the mark because they were like 0.005? The calculation was just barely off, and it just made this huge error. That's an example of, why math is important and why showing your work and double checking everything. So, and when kids say, well, I'll never do that, I had kids who said, I will never use math. They use it all the time now. And they use it because it's all relevant.
Yeah, it does. I think there was that one satellite where some people were using Imperial and some people were using metric system. The parts would match up or something. There was something like that. Yeah. It's like, yeah, let's get on the same page here, folks. We're using metric measure all the way. Good. Could you imagine that? I can't even convert it that easily.
So
building parts like that.
Going to the elephant in the room over this whole thing, which would be Benjamin Bloom.
Yeah. It's taxonomy.
Right. So there's 6 cognitive domains arranged in order of increasing complexity. They created a pyramid. He never said that it was a pyramid. But anyway, knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So it's been used for testing and looking at outcomes and providing a structure for designing assessments, but he also wants the formative, which would be the test, not necessarily the rote memory test. I mean, you could do that if you want, but it's how do you know that the kid actually knows what it is that they know? Can they apply that information? Is the information useful? That might be less scary than somebody thinking that they've had learning constipation and they can't come out with anything. And then when they walk out of the room, all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh. And it comes flooding out, you know. But I think in alternative ed, we try to look at a lot more mastery learning, as it were, which is also Bloom.
Yeah.
So,
and doing.
Right. And so how do you prove that you understand and that you know what's happening? Can you prove that you understand this? Do something for me. Here are some ideas of what you can do, but maybe it's a self-directed exercise. And so if the kid understands because you've given them clear objectives, they know precisely what it is that they're doing and why they're doing it, they may not have a hard time with it, but you might be able to mentor them in some way or other in order to help facilitate that end project. You just can't do it for them, and you should have to do it in the classroom so you're sure that mommy and daddy aren't doing it for them. Because I have a strong suspicion that every time that you get a call from mommy and daddy saying, why did he get a C on that paper? It's because mommy or daddy wrote that paper.
Yeah, I've never seen that. I can say maybe I have seen mom and dad write the paper, but I've seen some great plagiarists. I mean, just clearly it wasn't their voice at all. It's just like, that is not you. You don't write like this.
I'm plagiarizing.
Dad, but, yeah.
I sat down one day and a student had turned in a paper to me, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. I didn't know he was capable of writing such prose. It wasn't great, but it just seemed like the work came out of the blue. And I typed it into my search bar, and bam, it came up. And I looked at the kid and I said, hey, come here. I have a question for you. Are you dating somebody with this name? They said, no. Who's that? And I said, oh, come on. You know who it is. No, I don't. I said, it's the person who wrote your paper. What do you mean?
Shall I show you?
Now, the worst part of that is that it was the morning of conferences.
Oh no.
And I said, oh boy. So I'm just going to have to show mom and dad this tonight. Oh, you wouldn't dare, would you? Well, yeah, I would.
Yeah, I might.
Unless you can write your own paper and get it to me by this time and have everything done on it, and it better not be plagiarized.
That's awesome. Talk about leverage. That just so happens I'm going to meet your parents this evening. Would you like to give this another try? You've got 4 hours.
So, I mean, they have control over some of their assessment, you know. So, but more than there's this wonderful book, and it's called The Future of Smart, and it's by Oka Joshi Hansen, and she has so much in it. I mean, the book itself is just fascinating, and it gives you a lot to think about. But what she says is that testing is based on a narrow and outdated definition of what we would call smart. Mm-hmm. If you can test well, you must be smart. They fail to capture the full range of human intelligence and potential. High stakes testing is stressful for students and does not accurately measure their learning. And schools should focus on more holistic and authentic forms of assessment. Which means be learner-centered, embrace the multiple intelligences, incorporate authentic tasks. Which means
that'd be nice.
assess learning through real-world projects, portfolios, demonstrations, presentations. Promote self-assessment. Have the students rate themselves. And in a sense, you might take somebody who has a very low self-worth, and eventually they start to realize, hey, I'm really not so bad at this, because as they move on, because you know how people are. People would rather say negative things about themselves than they would positive, right?
I think generally speaking, you're right. Yeah.
If I say, tell me 10 positive things about yourself and 10 negative things about myself, what are you going to come up with first?
The positives, I suppose. You asked the question first, or that you put that first, but I would. Yeah, it's
Most
hard.
people will find the negatives far more easily than they will the positives.
I think you're probably right. They focus on because they think they need improvement. Well, I mean, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. If I'm a brilliant writer.
But it also works with their metacognition. And then you talk about learning rather than the end product. So if the end product is all you care about, then what's the good of the process?
It's an iffy thing to know if you're good at a test or not. I mean, if you're good at the testing, you can think that you're good at the content. But if you're not good at that form of testing, say multiple choice, you'll know. If you're not good at multiple choice, you'll have a track record. It's an interesting situation.
I was in this linguistics course, and we were reading through all this stuff, and we even got into the linguistic notations, right?
Right.
And he was heavy on the linguistic notations, so I knew my notations. We got to the test, and the test to me was pretty straightforward. And I just answered everything, and I got to this one part, and I could have sworn it said, use notations. So I ripped out and I went through it and got it all done. And I went to the last part of the test. I went back over my test and I handed it in. And I thought, I aced that test.
Oh.
The next class, I got the test back and I had a 78. Because the section that I had notated did not say use notation. It said something else. And I looked around and there were 3 other people in the class who had made the same mistake.
Wow, now that's an interesting question. It raises one. Is that the fault of the students or is that a fault in the test?
That is a fault of, I think that, here's what I think it is. I think that it is because you are waiting and you think that you are going to be tested on that notation. So you are looking for where on the test that is. And so, and your anxiety is already high enough because, well, you're working on your master's. So it's a high stakes test, right?
Right.
Because you really can't afford to get a bad grade. So everybody's in there working really hard and they've studied very hard. So going through with this new skill, yeah, I would say. And so what it taught me, because like I said, we need to learn from our tests. It taught me one, because he also put down, he said, your notations are beautiful. And I thought, well, at least that's good. It taught me to
Yeah.
slow down and reread the instructions more than one time to make sure that they actually said what I thought they said.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet that's a new strategy of yours from now on. I'll read the directions twice just in case, if it's not too complicated. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was thinking if there are three of you making that mistake, that's not just. I think there's a flaw in the instructions or in the way it was presented. Somehow, three of you had the impression to use notations. Um,
Well, I think it was, I
so
think that it
yeah,
was the test anxiety because we had that
no,
expectation. And all three of us
yeah.
saw what we had misread because there were
See, yeah,
17 other people in the class who had read it
you did
properly.
miss it. Correct. It's those three I'd worry about, but yeah, I just because I want my test to be as clear as possible. I'm not trying to. I wouldn't deceive anybody about it. I'd say don't use notations or something, just to make sure they wouldn't do it. But I don't know. I don't know the content. Here's one. When I was in college, however, I was blazing along, getting great grades in every class, and depending on the subject, some were better, but generally they were A's. And I go into this econ class, econ 203, I think, or 304, maybe. Anyway, and we take our first test. There's three of them, and the test comes back, and I got like a C minus. And like I don't get C minuses. It's just, I mean, I can blow it, maybe get a B. And I go, wow, I really screwed that. Maybe a C, but this was clearly like I almost failed the test.
You got a
And I
C
talked to another,
minus.
yeah, I talked to the classmates, and all of us were decimated by the grades. No one got higher than like a B, And I'm like, we went and talked to about four of us and said, this is really unusual that all of us here get great grades and all of us here almost failed your test. We'd like to let you know we think there's something wrong with your test. And he was so indignant. No, you just need to study. And it's like, but the content on the test wasn't in the classroom. And he said, well, that's your problem. I'm like, no, that would probably be your problem. This is an undergrad class, and there was no objective saying that you had to go do any kind of like research on your own, at that level. But in the end, I can't recall how it came through, but he was pretty indignant. And it was clear that his test was awful because the entire class, it was just all of a sudden A and B students were getting C's and D's. And it's like, there's something a little different about this. I've never had a class like this. And this isn't a cut class. This isn't like organic chemistry to med students, it's just econ. But
So,
yeah.
well, yeah, because sometimes there are teachers who try to screw with you. It's more of a psyop.
Yeah, they will. Some of them will. And I
And
don't know
they will
why.
make the questions, they'll ask the questions, and the answers will closely align with each other.
Yeah.
So that there'll be like a couple of words that are different in each one. And it's like, wait. So let's keep going because what everybody else says pretty much agrees with what all these other people also agree with what Hansen has to say about where we are. And I think it goes to where you can do tests, but I like open-ended tests.
Me too.
Because it gives the kids a way to express themselves without having to be clapped in irons to go a specific way.
Right.
So
they get to be individual.
right. And they'll get there on their own. So Flip the System, one of my favorite books. Harlick argues that the system is flawed and it's high stakes and standardized and that they're biased and ineffective, harmful, stifles learning and creativity because everything is about what's on the test.
Right.
Rather than allowing them to, in a sense, innovate with the information in their own heads, go someplace with it. So traditional methods of testing and assessment are not accurate or reliable measures. They are often biased and do not reflect the full range of their abilities and knowledge. Culture of stress and anxiety stifles creativity. Assessment is more, a student-centered approach is more effective in promoting their learning, because when they're given
Right.
the chance to demonstrate their learning, then it's more meaningful to them and they can express, and you get to see too what it is that they got from what you taught them.
That's really important. I'm testing for that.
Well, you
I want
also
to
want to make
know.
sure that they're, because if I'm memorizing things, I just remember
Yeah.
sitting around the dinner table with my nieces and nephews and their parents asking them questions about things that they've studied. And they said, oh, that test was last week. I don't know. I forgot all that information. It wasn't relevant.
Right. Right. That's true. Oh, it's done.
And
So I forgot it. Yeah.
And now they're saying, hey, I remember that because I picked up a book and it was like it kind of started coming back to them, but it wasn't something that they thought about very much at all. So, an authentic assessment, Harlick says, provides students with valuable feedback. So, it's an engagement, it's a conversation. And I think learning needs to be a conversation of something or other. And like I said earlier, where the students are learning, maybe the instructor is learning too. Are you open to having the students teach you? Because maybe they see things in a different light that you hadn't thought of before,
Mm.
no matter how jaded and skeptical and crusty you are, like me. But yeah. So, how do
Well,
you,
let's face it. A test tests a lot of times how you take tests, how you deal with the test. I mean, it's pretty artificial to say. And for the next 45 minutes, you will exhibit all your knowledge in X. And it's like, well, this next 45 minutes aren't working for me. I don't like them. Can I try another 45 minutes somewhere? I mean, that's part of it. It's like, today? I mean, I am not on my game today, but okay, here goes kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I'm not sure, like you said, that they're not extremely, like, very, very important to the assessment of the teacher and the content as well. I guess I looked at it that way. I want to know what I gave them and how they're thinking too. So my tests are generally pretty specific. I like to,
Now, if you're
um,
dealing with formulas, like what is this formula? What is that formula? How do you use that?
yeah, yeah,
Then those are very important things. For, let's say that
yeah,
you're
yeah.
talking about stoichionomy in chemistry, if you're talking about certain different parts of,
Terms on note cards would be like physiology. What is this? What is that? Upper, supra, super, that. Vocab stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you can do an assessment with that by turning it into a game. But when
Oh,
you're dealing
sure.
with chemicals, yeah, you need to kind of know what you're talking about with the
Hmm.
numbers and everything there.
Same thing. They have definite definitions. They definitely have definitions. What a great redundant phrase, but it's true. And you have to know those. And if you don't use the word in its correct definition, it's a little bit odd. Very specific words. Yeah. Or
But
formulas. Yeah.
right. So for science, you probably might want to have those. But do you
Yeah.
have them? Do you give them to everybody at the same time, or do you say who thinks that they're ready to take this test?
That's a good point. It's a vocab, say terminology test, 25
Mm-hmm.
questions. Are you ready for it? Take it when you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
You have a week. You got to give them some deadline. But yeah, get it down and take this online test or something. I would like to do that when it comes to terminology or some rote facts. But when it comes to synthesizing in material and producing something of your own, then that's definitely hard to assess at one point, but the process is easier to assess. You know what I mean?
Well, that's why they have labs, right?
Yeah, that would be it. Yeah, to demonstrate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just like to get to the demonstration and the synthesis of the knowledge as quick as I can. And I like to throw in, if I can, throw in the terminology as we go. And so it's in context. So some teachers, I would say, would give you that terminology. So we're doing terminology this week. At the end of the week, we take a test. However, I would say something like terminology. I'd say, yeah, I need you to know certain things. And I would keep on introducing it, putting it in, talking about it, using them, making them understand them in context, things like that.
Did I tell you about Julius Caesar?
You knew him? No, no, you
I
didn't.
did.
Or may have.
No, I was teaching my sophomores. I think they were sophomores. I was teaching my sophomores Julius Caesar. Yeah, they were sophomores. And we went through it, listening to it. We watched the movie, all this, and we talked about it. We went through a lot of different pieces, and they did some performances and what have you. And then I brought out the test about 3/4 of the way through the unit, and I passed it out. Everybody said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm giving you the test." And they said, "We're not ready." And I said, "I know you're not. So let's go through it." They said, "What?" I said, "Let's go through it." I said, "You will be getting this same test, except it won't be the same because the questions will be mixed up and the answers will be mixed up. So if you're thinking that you're going to write down number 1A, number 2C, you're wrong."
Oh, you're good.
So we did this, and we did it every single day for a week. The next day, I gave them the test. And I made sure it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays tend to be the best day to test. So I gave it to them on a Tuesday. And the next day, I looked at them and I said, "I have your test ready for you." And they said, "Yeah." And somebody said, "I bet I got an A, didn't I?" And I said, "Sadly, there were no A's." And they all looked at me in shock. And somebody goes, "What about B's?" And I said, "Sadly, there are no B's." They said, "What?" Somebody said, "Are there any C's?" And I said, "There is one C minus at a 70%. And they said, "D's?" And I said, 3. This is a class of 32. And they said, "We all got F's." And I said, "No, there are 4 of you that passed." And they said, "Can we take it again?" And I said, "You come to me, you as a group, decide how you want to rectify this situation, because I don't want to call your parents and tell them that you had the test in your hand for a full week. We went over it every single day. I told you things were going to be mixed up so that you should know what the questions were and the answers." I said, "So you come up with, you resolve the situation for me so I can raise your grades." And it worked. And it worked. Don't ask me what they did because I can't remember. I think
Yeah.
I think pockets of kids came up with different things is what they did. That was
Nice.
probably 35 years ago.
Those kids are not kids anymore.
No, they're not.
I did driver education, and I would always, before there was 6 drives, and the 6th drive was the driving test. And I've been cordial with the students, we're talking, and I told them, okay, tomorrow the test will be shorter drive. We'll do this one drive. I won't talk much. I'll give you comments, or I'll give you commands this way. And then I said, and here's the drive. And I took them on it. And I'd taken them on parts of the drive over all of the drives. I'd say, this is part of the final drive here. And over there, you're going to do like pull to the curb and do this. And so they knew the route. And I told them the automatic fails. things you want to avoid, and how much things would deduct them if they did. There's more for certain things than others. And I had no problems showing them the test because I want them to know everything there is to know about that test and how to drive correctly. And there's no secret. Like, I'm not going to tell you where the drive route is, so it's a surprise. Or, and I told them, listen, it's all through the neighborhood, and this is your home court, so why don't you practice it? Nail the final drive a couple of times before we go on it. I never had really any qualms about doing that. I really kind of enjoyed showing them, and it freaked the kids out. They're like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, it's you have to perform it. So I'll give you all the information to give you the best shot at doing that." And I like doing it that way. They really kind of concentrate on all the things that I wanted them to concentrate on.
And that's what you
Just by
want, isn't
default.
it?
Exactly what I want. Yeah. And then they'll go out and drive. God knows how they're going to drive. But at least when they were behind the wheel in the test for me, they were pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, you know how people drive. It's like, and I always tell them too, I go, listen, if you think you're a bad driver, I guarantee you there are a lot more that already have licenses, so you're doing fine.
When I took driver's ed, they pulled straws to see who was going to ride with me.
Who's going to ride with you? Were you an instructor or a student?
When I was a student.
Oh, student.
Yeah, they were terrified.
Why is that?
So there was a guy who lived up the street from me. And so he actually drove me and this girl who lived in a neighborhood not far from mine. He would drive us home after class at night because it was dark. It was during the winter. Because I figured that I wanted to learn how to drive in the ice and snow. So, and winter did not fail us. But anyway, so he decided that he was going to be the one that rode with me. Everybody else was terrified to ride with me. So.
Wow. You're that good a driver?
I don't know. I thought I did pretty well. So okay. So looking at Jerry Mintz, getting back into it, Jerry Mintz. He is known for AERO, which is the Alternative Education Resource Organization, AERO. And if you haven't seen it, I suggest that you take a look at it. They have a wide variety of books. They have a wide variety of just a whole bunch of different resources for alternative educators. And he, again, is another person who talks about holistic assessment. He also talks about the learner-centered, project-based, authentic assessment, emphasis on the growth and progress, like you talked about with the student on the paper, encouragement of self-evaluation. And then we have Tony Little, who was the headmaster at Eton College, which is very elite. And he talks about rigorous assessment, which is written exams, standardized tests, external examination, assessment for accountability, focus on academic excellence. So it's pretty much the rote kind of learning is what they want. And then we come to Dr. Peter Gray, who I've mentioned countless times on this podcast. And he is very critical of standardized testing. He says it doesn't adequately measure a student's creativity, problem-solving abilities, and critical thinking. So they're very limited. He wants authentic assessment, self-assessment, portfolio assessment, real-life problem-solving, unschooling and self-directed learning. Mm-hmm. And John Abbott, who is another, he's an educational researcher over in the UK. He talks about formative assessment as an ongoing process, and it's about the feedback. Assessment for learning, authentic assessment, holistic assessment, student engagement, alternative approaches, teacher development, assessment of skills for the future. And then we have Zaretta Hammond, who we all know for culturally responsive teaching, who talks about using culturally responsive assessment practices. So you need to take the entire child into accountability, into account, excuse me. You do formative assessments, but you adapt the instruction to each one of the children. So if you're going to give so if that's what you're going to do, you make sure that that test is good for that child. It's not a box cereal where everybody's going to eat it, but then you're really screwing over the diabetic kid. It is, it's sort of like creating a meal for each kid. And we've talked about that in earlier podcasts.
Well, it's interesting to know when you're testing, are you testing for knowledge or are you testing for the student's ability to learn? So if you're doing a formative test, portfolios, say, for example, the feedback comes, the papers get better. It's a continual thing. A test, a lot of times, just tries to pin something to a wall. Like, do you know this? And it's just knowledge. It's just kind of facts and points. Not a lot gets put on that. So if you're teaching for knowledge and you're teaching to teach and learning, if you're teaching how to learn, basically, then you're doing a much better job than just teaching facts and going, okay, here's the test. Did you hear this?
Right.
That's my point.
Yeah. No, I agree. She talks about, there's a couple of things that she talks about. We'll get to equity and assessment. So making sure that you are equitable, that you are fair, that you are as unbiased as you can possibly be. You have authentic and performance-based assessment. You assess non-cognitive skills. And this is where we might say you assess their grit.
Grit, I was going to say, yeah.
So perseverance, resilience, social emotional skills, and working with them on those. Assessment as learning. We talked about that. Growth mindset. How do you develop the growth mindset and how does the child demonstrate that? And then you might need to use some data-informed decision-making. So
constantly, yeah.
Right, where you're looking at what's working, what's not working, what are the trends, etc. So as you can see, holistic assessment and doing more than just handing them a Scantron and doing a standardized test is where otherwise, why are you even teaching? If it's for the paycheck. Yeah. And if you're an administrator and you know teachers who only give assessments based on Scantrons, why? Why are you allowing that?
It's a very, very one-dimensional assessment. Scantrons.
It is. It's darts. It's throwing darts at a board for many kids.
Yeah, they make some groovy patterns, though. I'll say. Yeah.
And it also feeds into their self-narrative that they're stupid and that they can't do anything. And why should they even try? It may be the source of some of their behavior problems.
I would say so. Yeah. It's hard to accept blows like that in a public forum and not sort of diverge into another realm. It's like, I'm done with this stuff. This is not working for me. And I think that's why I didn't like tests. It's the kind of final thing. Hey, you got an 83 on this. Oh, you got a 71. Oh, you got a 91. Oh, you got an 80. It's like, wow, all over the place. Like, I feel good this week, but not so much this next week. It's like, dang, man.
Yeah.
It's hard on you. Exactly. And who's to say that, like you said, on a Tuesday, I'm always best on a Tuesday. It's like, okay. I don't know about you, but I don't know what day I'm best at taking the test at until that day hits.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Autumn just decided that she hasn't had enough attention today.
So,
okay.
she's probably right.
So, we're going to wrap up.
All
So,
right.
so what we learned was holistic, self-directed, performance-based,
Yeah.
looking at the whole kid, finding methods for students to demonstrate that they have the knowledge, not just spewing it out.
Mhm.
So I will put notes down in the show notes for everybody. And I will also link to the blog that Philip has written. And yeah. So thank you very much, Mr. Philip.
Yes. Thank you.
And we will see you all next week with a wonderful new episode of Educational Triage. Until then, be well. Bye-bye.